We begin in Ukraine, where officials say that at least 4 people have been killed and several wounded in a Russian missile attack on the western city of Lviv. The local mayor says that dozens of buildings have been damaged and rescuers are now searching through the rubble for potential survivors. In late June, Lviv was hit in a large-scale Russian drone attack targeting cities across the country. DW correspondent Nick Connolly is standing by in Kyiv. Nick, what more can you tell us about this overnight attack?
Well, we've heard from the mayor there. He's called this the most devastating attack on Lviv since the beginning of the war in terms of civilian casualties. We believe this was an apartment building, but there was also a university hall of residents nearby, a school, images of people still going through that rubble, trying to find more survivors. Talk of about 30 plus injured. We've heard from the military that about 7 of 10 Russian cruise missiles were shot down over the night. But obviously those three still got through. These are very difficult to shoot down because they can just be programmed to imitate an attack on a certain target on Kiev, say, and then at the last minute swerve off in a different direction, making it much more difficult to guess and to prepare for these kinds of attacks. And I think it's really important to stress here, Lviv is basically 1,000 kilometers away from the front line. This is a city that has been a hub for humanitarian aid and that has largely felt very far away from the fighting and where people have felt safer than here in Kiev, say. So this is a real shock to people who thought they were in relative safety.
Okay, and Nick, you're going to stay with us, but first, elsewhere in Ukraine, the United Nations nuclear watchdog is demanding more access to the occupied Zaporizhzhia power plant. This as Ukraine and Russia accuse each other of planning to attack the site. Russia says Ukraine was intending to sabotage the plant, while Ukraine claims that Russia had planted explosives on a rooftop. Nick, you're going to comment on all of this, but first we're having a closer look because the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, says that it has not seen any visible indications of mines or explosives on site following checks in recent days and weeks. Inspectors say they have had no access to the rooftops of 2 reactors, nor some turbine halls or cooling systems. The head of the IAEA has called for additional access to confirm the absence of explosives. Zaporizhzhia is Europe's largest nuclear power plant. It has been under Russian control since close to the start of the invasion in early 2022. Nick Connolly is back with us in Kyiv. So Nick, tell us, the IAEA is requesting additional access to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to assess claims of explosives there. Is that likely to happen?
Well, this all depends basically on the whim, on the decision of the Russian occupying forces who control the site. And I think it's important to stress the kind of limited value of these inspections, given that they're having to request access far in advance. They don't have unimpeded full access to all parts of the plant, especially with things as easily moved as mines, say. It is possible that the Russians could have installed mines and then taken them away in time for that inspection, then put them back once the inspectors are gone again. So there certainly is a sense that, yes, Russia is playing along in part, but certainly there hasn't been anything near the kind of cooperation that Ukraine or the outside world would have wanted. There was talk at the beginning of the war of a kind of demilitarized zone around the power plant. That certainly hasn't happened. The Russians still have military kit on or around the site. There's talk of Russian military people based on the site, sleeping there because they basically know the Ukrainians can't attack them there, hiding basically their military equipment behind the reactors. And definitely there are consistent attacks on Ukrainian-held towns on the other side of the reservoir there who are basically defenseless because they can't fire back at the artillery that is attacking them from near the plant. So lots of questions there, and certainly a situation where it seems here from Kiev that that agency is just too slow and not able to really get to the bottom of things.
Ukrainian emergency workers have been holding drills to prepare for a possible radiation release from the plant. Those plans are said to involve evacuating around 300,000 people from the area. How high are the fears, Nick?
Well, it's important to stress here that 5 of the 6 reactors are cold. That means they've been run down, they've been switched off. It doesn't mean they don't need cooling, but they're obviously in a less kind of precarious state than if they were in full operation. The 6th is still being shut down, and so the kind of experts say that if there were some kind of disaster, it would be less damaging, less of a threat to human health than, say, what happened in Chernobyl when a power plant went, it went into kind of free fall while it was still in full operation. But this is a very densely inhabited area. You've got cities like Zaporizhzhia with hundreds of thousands of people just 50 kilometers down the road. Depending on where the wind is blowing on that day, that could be a huge hazard to human health. But there's also the aspect of uncontrolled events. Even if this isn't sabotage, even if none of the kind of warring parties plan to do anything. There are lots of problems with electricity supply to keep the cooling going, and water supply to keep the cooling going. And then there's also spent nuclear fuel just sitting on the site in containers that is much more vulnerable to any kind of shelling or attack from outside than the reactors themselves.
The IAEA itself has come under increased criticism from Kyiv. President Zelensky's advisor quoted as calling the IAEA's handling of the situation a clown show, and the agency head, Grossi, ineffective. What's behind those harsh words?
I think seen from Kiev here, they are basically convinced that this atomic agency, like lots of UN bodies, is more concerned with being seen to be impartial and keeping good relations with Russia than it is about, basically, as seen from Kiev, telling the truth, calling a spade a spade. They are frustrated with the kind of diplomatic niceties, the unwillingness to actually call things out. You have the IAEA saying they haven't seen any visible signs of mines, but that doesn't mean that they aren't there. These are things that can be easily hidden. So I think there's frustration with that, in the same way that there's frustration that lots of international bodies didn't go to the Kakhovka Dam disaster site early enough. They haven't called out the fact that they haven't been allowed onto Russian-occupied ground. The same with access to Ukrainian prisoners of war, where Ukraine has offered access to international bodies to Russian prisoners of war. Here, the same hasn't happened the other way around. So I think there's a generalized frustration there that these organizations, maybe because of their mandate, are just sitting on the fence, as seen from Kiev.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv, thank you.